So what I'm going to present today is actually part of a broader work that we have been doing over the past couple of years with some colleagues at WorldPop as well as colleagues from other institutions. So we focused on both looking into the geospatial mapping of out-of-school adolescents in 3 low and middle income countries. And that work was led by Dr. Victor Alegana, who is now at WHO East Africa, as well as part of the work was also focusing on understanding factors associated with attending secondary school in Tanzania. And that was done by using the demographic and health surveys data. And that is the work I'm going to prominently talk about today, because that was the work I led. So we already heard how key and important the SDG number 4 is, and the call for reducing out-of-school rates and to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all by 2030, as well as we are all aware of the benefits from education in all aspects of human life, and especially for low and middle income countries. So Tanzania and secondary school attendance rate has been a little bit of a peculiar case. So there has been an increment over the past decades in attendance of secondary school. And despite education being a national priority since independence, and despite the free education policy implemented, we can still see wide regional inequalities in attendance rates, and barriers to access still persist in the country. And so the aim of our work was to improve the understanding on the drivers of adolescents in school attendance versus non-attendance in Tanzania, and as well as to contribute to the discussion around the relationship between school attendance and some contextual factors. And in particular, we looked into distance to school, as well as we looked into the pupil to qualified teacher ratio. And we used some GIS-based techniques and data sources to actually construct some contextual variables to be tested in our models. And so preliminary, what we did with the DHS data for the latest round of the DHS, we looked at the adjusted net attendance rate for secondary school as an outcome variable. And then we also constructed a range of individual level and household level variables, basically testing those using a bivariate analysis technique to test those which were significant to be then going into our logistic modeling. As well as individual level variables and household level variables, we, as I mentioned, worked with 2 contextual variables mainly, so travel time to the nearest secondary school, as well as the pupil to qualified teacher ratio, and we'll call it PQTR. And that means that the lower the PQTR, it means smaller classes, and that enables the teacher to pay more attention to individual students. And so by constructing surfaces for these 2 contextual variables and then overlapping the DHS cluster points, we were able to use them as contextual variables and test those factors onto our modeling technique. So this pink map here is a surface of the travel time to the nearest secondary school. And that was computed by using Access Mode version 5 software. And so we triangulated school locations with a set of ancillary spatial data on elevation, land cover, road network, and so forth and so on. And of course, travel time to the nearest school is a measure of access to secondary school. And this is the way we interpreted it in our modeling. So what this map is actually telling us is that in Tanzania, only a very small fraction of the sampled population lives in areas which are greater than 2 hours from the nearest school. And that is roughly the 10% of the DHS clusters that lives further than 2 hours from the nearest school. These are the 2 maps. So the map B preliminary is the surface for the PQTR. And so, as I said, the lower, we want ideally a low PQTR, so smaller classes and better attention of teachers to individual students. And this continuous surface of PQTR was created using an inverse distance weighting interpolation technique. And again, the values of the PQTR were extracted from this continuous surface using each of the DHS primary sampling units, which have GPS locations. And so by using the set of individual and household level factors and variables that we created in the DHS, as well as by putting these two contextual variables in our multi-level random intercept logistic regression model, we were able to estimate the probability of secondary school age teenagers to attend secondary school. We use the multi-level modeling technique basically to allow for testing the contextual variable characteristics, but also to take into account the hierarchical structure of the data. So I'll go briefly into the findings. So basically here we're looking at individual and household level factors in our model. And so the data, the findings are telling us that individual and household level factors played the biggest role in explaining secondary school attendance versus non-attendance. And they all go into the expected direction. So for a higher wealth index, there is a higher probability of attending school. Female adolescents have a lower probability of attending school, and those who belong to households where the head has a higher level of education have a higher probability to attend secondary school. When we look into the findings for the travel time, only that small portion that lived farther away than 2 hours from schools has a lower probability of attending school. So it's the only significant group as we compare with those who live below 30 minutes. And so I guess here one reflection is that a lot of the geographical variation from this model was already been in a way taken into account by having region as a covariate in the model. And so that is why we probably don't see so much variation in the travel time to the nearest school and not so much significance. When we go into the PQTR and we look into whether that played any significant effect on secondary school attendance, very similar to what I said about travel time, there was no significant effect of the PQTR on explaining access to and attendance to secondary school. And again, there was no huge geographic variation in the distribution in Tanzania, as well as there was a test really to test the PQTR as a measure of quality, but most likely we could test a lot more variables which can tell us a little bit more about quality of schools, but that was what was available at the time. So in conclusion, from this set of work here, the recommendation would be that policies aiming at reducing non-attendance should firstly aim at alleviating barriers at household level and individual level, so such as household wealth disadvantages, poverty, gender disparities, and at promoting education for the entire population. Just to show briefly a couple of maps from the other work I mentioned at the beginning, led by Dr. Victor Alegana, where of course the aim there was to contribute to the understanding of the geographic access to secondary school at subnational level and especially at high resolution level. And I acknowledge that a lot of the colleagues before have mentioned the WorldPop data, as well as the integration of the education data with having a good denominator. So having absolute numbers for the appropriate age groups we're looking at. And so here we estimated the non-attendance in Tanzania at a 1 by 1 kilometer spatial resolution. And these are, again, 3 fine spatial resolution maps for 3 different countries we looked into for the work: Tanzania, Cambodia, and Dominican Republic. And again, the challenge is to integrate with age and sex data. And again, I'm aware that colleagues at UNESCO and Amelie and others have been looking into age and sex and how to integrate that. And thank you.